Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy by Eidos Montréal is an underrated experience. Or perhaps more precisely put, it's a very underappreciated game. It was released in 2021 to a positive critical reception, but still, its sales managed to disappoint its publisher, Square Enix. By now, it seems certain that we're not getting a sequel, and that the game can be regarded as a commercial failure. And that's not fair, because the game is such a good time. The Guardians of the Galaxy team is made up of the misfits Star-Lord, Drax the Destroyer, Rocket Raccoon, Gamora and Groot. They're on a mission to make some money, but things don't go as planned. While in a quarantine zone, Star-Lord finds a yellow gem and accidentally releases a destructive force upon the universe. The team escapes the unknown entity but is captured by Star-Lord's ex-lover, a captain of an overcall spaceship. Aboard this spaceship, Star-Lord meets Grand Unifier Raker, who was caught trespassing the quarantine zone looking for something, and Star-Lord's could-be daughter, Nikki. The Guardians of the Galaxy are given a fine and set out to find the means to pay it. When they return to pay the fine, something is wrong. The crew has mutinied and seems obsessed with something called the Promise. From here on, shit really hits the fan. The story is very comic book-like. There's a lot of witty dialogue, a lot of banter, actiony fun, but also some emotional moments. It's spread out across the game quite evenly, though the heavier stuff really comes into play in the second part of the game. If you've watched a Marvel movie, you kind of know the drill. The banter between the game's characters is enjoyable, and your team members really have a lot to say. They literally won't shut up. Now that could be an issue, but surprisingly, it's not. The developer has said that they were inspired by real-life teamwork, and you can tell. It feels authentic that the group won't stop interfering with the decisions you're making. They are part of the team, and even though you're the one propelling the plot forwards, you're not going to be able to do so without them making their thoughts known. At some point in the game, you can suggest a solution, and even though it's the right one, your team won't make the next move until you've convinced them. Now this isn't a role-playing game, and sometimes convincing your team is just hearing them out and then giving them the same command once more. But it works, and you become aware of your team members' personalities, whether or not you're familiar with them from the Marvel Universe in advance. If you've played Tomb Raider, Horizon or God of War Ragnarok, you're used to the characters of the game guiding you through a puzzle even before you've started it, and Guardians of the Galaxy does the same thing. This can be an annoyance for some, but I actually really enjoyed it. The puzzles are really quite easy to solve, and I think I only got stuck one time through the entire game, but it really makes sense that if you're in a team of loudmouths, they will let you know what they think is the right solution to the puzzle, and they will ridicule you for being too slow to solve it. It just makes sense. So the story holds up, but what about the gameplay? Guardians of the Galaxy is a single-player third-person action-adventure game, and it's kind of old school. It's giving Uncharted in space. The levels are closed-off areas, and you can only move from the beginning of the level to the end. There's no open world running and jumping. It's really a plus for this game, because it makes it a tight and well-directed experience. If the game had been open world like Spider-Man, it would have required the Guardians to have stayed on one planet in one city with different areas. That's not the case, and the team is traveling the universe, and we get to see different planets and interesting places. Every level includes a large amount of shooting and commanding your teammates to attack. This is very much a single-player experience, and when fighting enemies, you're the one in charge of your own attacks, but you're also able to command your team to make powerful attacks, tactical maneuvers, or interact with the environment. As Star-Lord, your primary attack is shooting your guns, and even though this gets kinda stale near the end of the game, the ability to command your teammates creates a bit of variation and ensures that fighting enemies don't get too monotonous. The game is about 20 hours long, and the gameplay stays entertaining the whole way through. The game is good, and perhaps even great, but it was still a flop, and now the time has come to place the blame. One of the game's enemies is the Marvel movies. I've seen the first Guardians of the Galaxy years ago and enjoyed it, but haven't seen a Marvel movie since. However, I know that the Marvel movies are popular, and that the fans of the Guardians of the Galaxy would like to see the characters from the movie in a game, and not a game creating a story from scratch with a voice actor voicing a Star-Lord that doesn't look like Chris Pratt. I get it, you want more, but I don't think this was the game's biggest challenge. The Arkham games were huge successes, and they were released while the Nolan movies were the golden standard. People didn't really complain about Batman being voiced by Kevin Conroy and not Christian Bale. The games kinda stood their own ground. The main antagonist to the Guardians of the Galaxy was Marvel's Avengers. Marvel's Avengers was released the year prior to Guardians of the Galaxy, and became quite infamous for its lack of content, repetitive gameplay, and being a live service game. The game was a critical and commercial failure, and was really only praised for its brief single-player campaign, and even that was called mediocre. Live service games seem like a thing the publishers really want to happen, but the public doesn't really want. A game like Wolfenstein Youngblood seemed like the beginning of the end. The amount of hype for the game was close to zero, and it didn't change when the game was released. The franchise was moderately successful as it was, and critically acclaimed. Still, a live service game nobody wanted was inevitable. To be fair, I actually think the beginning of the end was Anthem, which came out earlier than Youngblood, but the less said about Anthem the better. People were hyped for the Avengers, but at the same time I think people had live service fatigue. The product was not good, and I think that made people even more tired of this live service formula. Guardians of the Galaxy is a single player game, but if you just look at reviews of it or some gameplay videos, there are always several characters on screen, and it screams live service game that was turned into a single player game because of the Avengers backlash. Guardians of the Galaxy is a game by the studio that helped develop the Avengers and released by the publisher that released the Avengers. A publisher who time and time again has said that live service games are the future. The fear of the game being a live service game turned single player more than halfway through the development seemed fair. But fear not, the Guardians of the Galaxy is a single player game from the ground up. And it's not mediocre, it's a really good time. If you want a great single player action adventure experience, this game is what you're looking for. We'll probably never get a sequel, but hopefully, the Guardians of the Galaxy will go from underappreciated to cult classic.